Welcome to the Red Bean Podcast, New Orleans edition. This is Mr. Toad.
And I'm Dr. Frog.
And we are talking about...
Madoka Magica.
I have to tell you...
Excuse me, I just sneezed. We're talking about an anime today.
Yeah, we are.
I just had a spasm in my head. But this anime, it's a deconstruction of the magical girl genre. And... for those of you who don't know, that's shows like Sailor Moon. Where
Sailor Moon.
You usually have a group of girls who have magical powers, and then they fight evil things and save the day and make friends and all this.
There is no tuxedo-man in this show.
There isn't. There's not that equivalent. So there's no...
but I think
mysterious.
What I also kind of takes me back to some degree... And we're going to get into the aspects of the
Darien.
But it kind of reminds me of like a Faustian bargain.
Yeah, and I don't want to... Well, I guess it's okay to get in some spoilers. If you're listening to this, you've probably already seen it. But you're right. A Faustian myth is one where, from the Goethe novel, the great German 1600s playwright, he... I don't think he was a playwright, though, but certainly novelist. He wrote... Faust. And Faust made a deal with Mephistopheles. It was one of those devil at the crossroads kind of deals that was based off of. And what it was is Faust had a burning desire for Gertrude or something's affection. So he made a deal with the devil for his soul to, I think, gain all knowledge in the universe or something like this. And like any good Faustian myth, it ends up turning on him where he regrets it, and then he tries to save her from hell and all this other stuff that happens. I forget the witches scene in Chapter 3. Highly recommend you read it. I haven't read it for a number of years. But that's basically what a Faustian myth is. It's a deal with the devil where usually the wish that, once it's granted, isn't as great as you think. And Madoka Magica, more commonly called, its formal name is Puella Magi, Madoka Magica. Madoka Kaname is our main character, and she is an ordinary middle school girl. And we're talking about it today because when it was first recommended to me, I thought my friends were sort of trolling me, telling me to watch this, what seems like a slice of life anime.
It definitely.
I like the color of your hair.
It definitely had that Sailor Moon kind of feel, but then it took a 180 after the third episode.
Only 12 episodes, 20 minutes each, 4 hours in length total, and yeah, you're right. At the end of that first hour, episode 3,
shocking.
You were surprised.
I was shocked because we had these characters.
I like how immediately you're like, well, they're going to bring her back, right?
I know, that was my reaction. I was like, listen, this is the main character, and we're not going to get into spoiler territory too much, but
we just say that things are pretty heavy.
Yeah, the violence,
and I describe it as a snowball that just gets heavier and faster, and then whoosh, because the twists and turns in the plot when you figure out some of their powers and backstories, and what I like is similar to Higurashi when they cry.
Yeah,
you get revealed different pieces of the story in different perspectives and ways, so that by the end of the story you have a complete view of what's happening. Pretty much mirroring Madoka Kaname's experience. She's kind of a blank slate going into the show as well, and she, like us, suddenly figures out all the bits of information, by the end, in the same way we do.
I think there was an undertone, and this is my interpretation when I was getting from it, was there's this undertone of neglect. Like, it seems
like the absence of the parents being emotionally there.
Yeah, and you see kids are struggling, and the teachers are kind of like...
Teachers are self-absorbed. The teacher always talks about her relationship troubles in front of class. I think there's also a theme of dysfunction.
Yes.
Everything seems a bit dysfunctional, and it starts out, the very first scene in the very first episode, when the tomato that the child is trying to stab with a fork.
Yeah.
What does he do? He pokes with the fork and it falls off the table.
It slips away.
Yeah.
So there's a big theme.
There's a little bit of things not going people's way.
And I think there's also an aspect where we want people to do certain things, and maybe it's kind of like this feeling of being let down.
I think there's also the expectations of being let down, I think, are often connected with the reality not matching up with our image of what we want it to be. So when we look at Sayaka, for example, the blue-haired girl,
yep,
the thing that she wanted to happen, I'll put in as vague terms as possible. If you've seen the show, you know what she does. But her expectations, as Kyoko later points out, is, are you doing it because you want to do it, or is there some selfish motivation behind what you were doing? You know, did you expect other people to respond differently or to treat you differently?
See, that's
of what you've done.
See, that's the whole thing, is that...
And then, of course, when it might or might not happen, that's when expectations don't get met and people get upset and regret and despair.
Regret, yeah.
And I think there's a fine line of regret to despair. I wonder if the 5 stages of grief are represented in each of the different characters.
They both have their hang-ups.
Sayaka certainly has this acceptance at the end, but I mean, you saw there was an acceptance at the end, let's say, of Sayaka's arc, and but before that, you saw the denial when she says, "No, I'm going to be different," right? And then rage, right? Anger. She kind of goes through those 5 stages of grief, which were originally done by a psychologist from New York, and she studied the way that patients take news about a terminal illness that will shortly kill them.
Yeah.
And a lot of people misuse these sort of 5 stages of grief. They'll go on and say, oh, this is about people reacting to negative situations, like if your dog dies, the way you deal with it. It's not really like that. It's more about the way that you handle your own impending doom. And so I think that this show in particular, in representing the 5 stages of grief in each of the characters, sort of accurately portrays the findings of what the psychologist found.
Also, there's this whole thing about
their own impending doom, not the impending doom.
Not only impending doom, but can we fix other people?
Yeah, can we fix other people so that some of the world that's not perfect can at least be perfect in our corner?
Yeah.
So, think about the selfish wishes that some magical girls made.
And by the way, for the audience who's not sure what's going on,
I'm talking too big.
There is a creature called Kyubey, which is like a cat.
Kyubey.
And this cat can give you Supergirl powers or Magic Girl powers. Yeah. And but there's a...
It's for your soul.
Yeah. It's just a small transaction.
Is there anything you'd want to trade your life for? That's worth...
And one of the things I kept telling you when I was watching this, I felt like this was kind of a conversation that was kind of like, we're on a treadmill, and you can never get off the treadmill.
There's a little bit of... Nietzsche talked about this for a bit. Or actually, it might have been Kierkegaard in Fear and Trembling, when it's something like, there's a difference in looking over the side of the cliff. So there's a difference if you're hanging off the side of the cliff and you're worried you might fall, right? Because your grip might not hold, you might slip and fall. And that's a different kind of, that's fear. But despair is when you look down, standing at the edge of the cliff, and know you can jump.
That's right.
Yeah. And so there's a little bit of that. That relates, I think, to what you were just saying about, the impendingness of the fate, let's say, of magical girls.
And what do you think about her fate?
Kyoko's.
Yeah.
Her backstory
is
intense. And, her family's situation, not to give too much away, it's that she learned a really hard lesson about what sacrificing for others can lead to.
But it also kind of goes into this different thing.
And that she wants to warn others that it's okay to be selfish, and you shouldn't feel bad about being selfish.
Because I think the underlying issue is, and I think we talked about this before, is this idea that we can never know what other people really want. Because we're not them.
Exactly. I mean, this is a point that Ayn Rand pointed out. A lot of people think that, she famously has a view called ethical egoism that says that one ought to act in their self-interest exclusively, understood as their best interest. You ought to look for your own interest. Her argument for that was that we know our own needs and wants and desires much better than other people know our needs, wants, and desires. And furthermore, we only know others' needs, wants, and desires imperfectly. Furthermore, we're in the position to best influence our own outcomes for needs, wants, and desires. However, we're not in the best position to meet others' needs, wants, and desires. And so what happens is whenever we try to help people, we end up sort of mucking up the job. We end up not doing as great a job as we could. We end up messing it up. So, for example, let's say you studied art, and there's someone who is going into college and says, "What should I study?" And you get really excited and you say, "Oh, you should study art." I love it, right? And then what you'll notice is whenever people give advice, how egocentric their advice comes from. They're giving you what they would do. They're not actually appreciating that you're something completely different.
Sure.
Yeah. And so
do you think it's hard to separate the artist from the art?
Well, and so just to wrap up the point and tie it back to the selfishness of our actions, that kind of relates to what Kyoko was saying. She's saying, no, look, if you do a wish for someone else, something bad's going to happen. Because you're going to do something that even they don't like Kyoko's father was like, no, I didn't want this.
Yeah.
Or you're going to end up not treating your own life as significant value as it should be, meaning your desires matter more. Because you shouldn't sacrifice yourself for others' desires, is the Randian point.
I also think it kind of goes into this other aspect of paternal, maternal, and self-preservation in the sense that it's only when we attack our problems head on that we get the best solution. If we try and hide from them, they'll usually catch up to us.
I think the tension among magical girls is that in order to survive, you have to be very independent and strong and sturdy and not really rely on others, right? But that runs up into the humanity, so to speak, of them because we're social animals, right? So, of course, we want to have people that can relate to us, and we relate to them, and we have friends, and we have support, and people support each other and care about each other. But that doesn't groove or jive with the efficiency of what magical girls need to do every night when they go out and hunt witches, which, for those who haven't seen the show, are sort of what magical girls are tasked to do, to abolish witches that cause despair and people to harm themselves and others, and they have to fight these witches.
I have to tell you though, the artwork, amazing,
especially for 2011.
Yeah,
this was only 4 years after Higurashi.
I love the monsters because the animation completely different.
I think the something about anime that might turn people off is the eye to head ratio, and I think it's
the eyes are always bigger.
Yeah, I think it's okay, but I think the surreal aspect of, let's say, the labyrinths that they fight in, and the art design, the surrealness and simplicity and minimalism of what's in the background, I think gives way to enhance with the character design. The character design is fantastic.
The other thing that got me too with this show was the background. Did you notice those parts? Like it's a grassy field, but then there's an industrial factory in the background. So it felt like
certainly comments about artificial versus like nature, like what's natural.
What's real? What's natural? What's not natural?
Like when Sayaka was talking to Madoka, in open honesty, they were sitting on a grassy hill along the river. They were surrounded by nature, and they were speaking very openly and honestly. And then what was happening in the factory scenes? Well, usually it was Hamura that was having to hide something from Madoka while they were talking and having to deliver really rough truths about the world. So there's this contrast between the like open, honest nature thing, and even when they're walking, you notice that when they're walking with Hitomi, the green-haired girl, Hitomi, Sayaka, the blue-haired girl, and Madoka, the pink-haired girl.
Madoka is the main protagonist in the show.
Well, I would argue that there's that there's another main protagonist. But with that being said, that shows how fleshed out all these characters are.
Yeah.
That they all have their own story. They all have their own time on the screen. And I think with Hitomi, even at those beginning innocent episodes, what do they do when they walk to school? They walk through a forest with water, and then what ends up disrupting them through telepathy and then through the events, suddenly they're not all walking together. Some of them are staying home from school, some are sick, some are out, some are, and then they have to abandon that kind of.
What did you think about the family environment that Madoka?
It makes me want to go to Tokyo if they have all these updated houses. It's obviously a large house that Madoka lives in, very wealthy. Her mother's a businesswoman, I believe a lawyer.
Yeah.
Who has to stay out and drink with the clients and is aiming for the top spot at the company.
And the husband's
stay-at-home husband. Yeah, stay-at-home husband. My father was stay-at-home for a few years.
Okay.
And, he helps watch after the baby, seems very supportive. Neither of her parents, though, I think are that involved in Madoka's life and what she feels. And maybe it's because she's such a milksop character. Milksop's a sort of British phrase saying, oh, I don't know, kind of wishy-washy, no personality. So maybe her parents are just used to their daughter being wishy-washy,
yeah,
milksop. So then they never dig deeper because there's no deeper thought. She just thinks, oh, there's nothing interesting about me.
Did you see that part where she's talking about disciplining her daughter? Remember that part?
Well, to the teacher. Yeah, the mother's talking to the teacher. I think it's that Madoka's always been good, is what Madoka said. You said I've always been good. And maybe Madoka's maybe harder on herself than her parents are. But the parents are like, I don't know how to punish her. She does her schoolwork. She doesn't lie.
That's one of the things I liked about her, because she cares about everybody, but then everyone's just kind of like going off the rails, and she's just trying to like hold on to everybody, right?
What I think is fascinating is she cares about everyone. And even there was one time in the show where someone tried to kind of call her bluff and say, well, if you cared, then you would do more. You're not doing enough. What are you doing? You're just sitting there and doing nothing. But I think with Madoka, her actually caring about others was genuine.
Yeah.
She didn't need to take actions, because an action would be to, in this show, satisfy her own underlying need or desire. So if someone had to help other people, it's really not helping other people. It's them fulfilling their own internal, I just have to help them, right? So for example, with Sayaka's case or with Kyoko's case, they're all doing it somewhat for their own internal motivation of what they want to do. Whereas Madoka genuinely wants to help people, but she doesn't have an underlying ego that like is driving her to act in a way to satisfy some sort of desire she has. It's almost like she literally has no desire in most of in the show, right? Most of the show she has no desire, but she just has a genuine love of other people.
See, I think that's what gives her power.
It is, because I think it's a more objective view of coming into the discussion. If you go into it with your ego and how you need to be satisfied in these ways because your expectations have to line up with what reality actually is, then you're going to end up doing something that's somewhat self-serving, even though you say you're selfless.
Yeah.
But she really is selfless, doesn't have an ego. But because she doesn't have an ego, she's not motivated to act on anything until she finds something that might actually help the people that she wants. Maybe. We'll leave it up to the audience to find out.
That's right. Overall, I think this is a pretty interesting show. This is a show that you what do you say? Like, watch it 2 times?
I would say the first few episodes are slice of life, if you like that genre, but I would say it's sci-fi horror.
I would say sci-fi, kind of horror, mystery. I would say mystery a little bit.
It does read and tell like a mystery story because it reveals information a little bit of a time, similar to Higurashi. You find out bits.
Yeah.
Have you? It almost reminds me. Have you played Danganronpa?
I have not.
Okay, there's a really good series of games, and instead of talking about that, I'll talk about. Is it Murder, She Wrote?
I love Murder, She Wrote.
No, not Murder, She Wrote. It's Dorian Gray.
Okay.
Have you ever seen that?
The painting with the guy and he doesn't age, but the painting ages.
No, I'm mixing. There's something where there's a novel, and they're describing what happens. It's almost like a Sherlock Holmes-esque novel, and maybe someone else in the comments can tell me which one I'm thinking of.
Well,
and what happens though is it describes all the narrator's actions, and it's a murder mystery. You're trying to find out who killed someone, and you find out at the very end in a twist that the main character that you've been reading about is actually the killer.
Wow.
And when you go back and reread all the actions it described, it'll say something like, oh, they took out a piece of paper and wrote something out with their pen and then put it back in the drawer, which doesn't have any significance. But then in the murder, you're like, oh, they wrote the fake suicide note for the thing. You know, it's one of those things where you can read it and you're like, no, this character's completely innocent. And in fact, when they get arrested halfway through the story, you're on their side. You're like, they didn't do anything. And then at the end, you realize that you/the main narrator is the killer the entire time.
Whoa.
Yeah. And I'm only talking vaguely about that because I don't want to actually spoil any different genres or media.
I think we can go into all the characters, but, you know,
yeah.
I think maybe instead of that, I think this is just a good primer part one, because we're talking about...
So this is the base 12 episodes, 2011 version. There's a version that came out last year. It's a completely different story with new characters.
I thought the graphics were great. The fight scenes, awesome.
The fight scenes were surreal and awesome and everything you love. Then very quick as well. It didn't go on and on and on. It was
quick.
30-second fights, 1-minute fights. But it was really about the drama and the tension between the characters, their growth, and seeing all of them as complex characters interact. And I think there's something to be said about each of the characters. The magical girls wished for different things, and that was shown in their personalities and their skills and everything. But I think also it was showing how different philosophies can collide and clash with one another.
Yeah, like some...
The difference between Kyoko and Mami, or Hamura and,
Because the morality was all over the place. You had someone who would never steal, and you have another person who would steal when bad dialogue.
Deep comments about love, too.
Yeah.
Kyoko has a very different philosophy than Sayaka, but there's lots of different ways that people connect on the common humanity, even if their lives and philosophies look different. It's definitely, I think it's a masterpiece. If you go back and watch it again, knowing everything, this time, Mr. Toad, I think there's so much double meaning to the conversations once you know everything. It's like everything makes sense that you didn't catch the first time.
I have to agree with you on that one.
Yeah,
I have to agree with you.
It's definitely worth the second watch as well. But we might come back after watching Rebellion, which is the sequel movie, which is pretty wild.
Yeah.
Because where do you go from here?
That's right.
And maybe we'll do a second one, but who knows?
So our score is 1 out of 10. 1 being no way, Jose. I have to have my spleen checked out. Or 10. Hey, freaking awesome.
Oh, I mean, I'd put it 11 or 10. I would say there's no piece of media that has engaged me as quickly as this. This was a gut punch. I would put this 9.5. And I've thought about it for years. 9.5. A 9.5. Really? Yeah. That's excellent. That's really good.
It's a great score. Because what I liked about it was the story, character development, the plot. I felt like there were stakes actually, at a certain point, I was like, yeah, there are definitely stakes. I mean, I'm not going to get into it.
The only complaint I can think of is sometimes I felt like the pacing of a particular episode was to fill a 20-minute episode slot. So I feel like pauses were sometimes drawn out a little bit on certain episodes. And it's one of those, they could have shaved that extra 2 minutes off that scene.
I wish they kind of got more into origins a little bit more. I wish they would have shown some imagery of I'm not going to get into it.
I think they talked about the most important parts of people's pasts, and then H.P. Lovecraft, right, or just like Stephen King, they'll describe things in an eerie way, but I think the storytellers knew that your mind would fill in the empty blanks of what we don't know about their past.
Okay.
And we would assume, what our minds would imagine is probably better than what they could articulate in an episode or two, or show us or tell us. They want to show us and less telling us. But maybe, I don't know.
Well,
I thought it was intentional that they left a lot out.
Well, we got 11 and we got a 9.5. I have to say, definitely worth checking out.
Definitely worth checking out. To make one last point, I think the reason it was intentional to leave some of that out is because I think it also highlighted one of the philosophic points about knowing the other people imperfectly.
Yeah.
So we know the characters imperfectly just like they know one another imperfectly. I think it was very intentional.
A lot of being humble, really.
Well, I don't know about being humble, but I think it's about, in reality, what, let's say, Mommy was striving for is someone to really get her and understand her. And I think a dark reality that is kind of presented here is that, we all kind of die alone.
Yeah.
And no one's going to perfectly understand you.
And no one's there to save you.
And you're lucky if you understand yourself.
I think that's one of the things that really moved me with the Mommy is that she really was doing...
M-A-M-I.
Yeah. I would say for her in particular, she just wanted people to love her, and she was by herself for so long that...
Well, I mean, her family.
Yeah.
The way her family went, and then the circumstances under which she formed a contract, there was no one. And you're right, living alone. There's also references to, there are cases of this in London. Someone died in a basement apartment, and it took them 16 years to find until someone smelled something through a vent. But it took 16 years before the body was found, and everything was on their security. And everything was paid, deducted, or direct deposited into their account, and rent was automatically taken out. So it's there's a little bit of fear of if you're in a place like Tokyo, let's say, or New York or London or something, you're surrounded by the most amount of people you can be. But at the same time, you feel extremely alone and unconnected, which, it seems like, how could that be the case? You're surrounded by a lot of people.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you have this extreme isolation.
But that's one of the things. You can feel alone in a crowded, small or small.
I think that's, did Robin Williams, before he committed suicide, I think he said that was one of the worst feelings you could have, or something. It was, he described it once as being surrounded by everyone, but being very alone. His depression.
Yeah, the connection of connecting with them people, and that's one of the things about the Magic Girl. You could tell they all have their own agendas, but at a certain point,
they're all very well built characters.
Yeah, they're all well built, and they all kind of work with each other. But then everyone has their own motivation of doing what they want to do.
Well, and as Magical Girl, there's a little mechanic I don't mind mentioning, which is you have to kind of purify your gem from despair with the grief seeds, and this kind of motivates a selfishness. In order to succeed and become more powerful, you have to kind of say, okay, you're taking up this spot of the town, I'm going to go find an empty town, and then kill witches there. So it doesn't really encourage cooperation, because then what? You're splitting one grief seed between two people who are fighting together? It doesn't make sense to pair up if you want to be the strongest.
Yeah.
But
I would say on that note, yes, I think we're going to call this, and I'm giving it 9.5.
And I'm giving it the high score out of
11.
Any of our rankings. Yeah, I'm going to say there's an 11 out of 10. But this might be the only time I use it.
Sure. But overall, I look forward to checking out part 2 on this show.
Yeah, Rebellion.
And learn more about what is the Rebellion and what are people fighting for.
Yeah, why is it called Rebellion, and what do we do from here?
I have a feeling there's going to be some disagreements within this in that movie.
Well, and the hard part is to reconcile maybe some of the imagery on the front cover of the movie, or maybe even some stills that you might have seen about the show. How do we reconcile that with the reality of what the original show showed? So how are we going to reconcile some of those?
All I can say is Kyubey, if he was probably here,
no.
He probably would say, no pain.
He would say,
no
hey,
game.
Do you really want to know the answer to that question? Is that something you'd trade your soul for?
Yeah.
I could say, no, we have Google now. We don't need to do it. We have Alta Vista on our Netscape browser.
Well, on that note,
Ask Jeeves.
we're going to finish this episode. This is the Red Bean Podcast, New Orleans edition.
With Dr. Toad and my compadre.
Dr. Frog and Mr. Toad.
Sorry, I got those. You usually say it first. You usually say Mr. Toad and then I say Dr. Frog.
We change it up once in a while.
Change it up, and then I mess up the very. Maybe we'll just re-record, right?
No. We're gonna submit it. But overall, I hope you guys enjoy the anime. Check it out. Put a comment in the section. Let us know what you think of the show.
Oh, what do you think about the show? What was your reaction when you first saw it?
Alrighty, guys. We'll talk to you later.
Take care.
Have a wonderful day.
Bye-bye.
Bye.